This happened decades ago, back when I still told myself I was just doing work, not ruining lives. The papers later called it a tragedy involving a businessman's daughter who vanished after a night out at a disco. What they never printed was my name, or the fact that influential people, men with clean suits and dirty hands, paid me $100,000 to make sure she didn't make it home. My motives weren't dramatic. No revenge, no ideology. Just money and momentum. By that point in my life, I was already sliding downhill, telling myself that one more job would set me up, that I could quit after. The circumstances lined up too neatly. The girl had routines, the people who wanted her gone had resources, and I had a reputation for being discreet. At the time, I framed it as inevitability. If it wasn't me, it would be someone else. That lie made it easier to accept the call, easier to listen as they explained why she was a problem. I didn't ask many questions. I rarely did back then. That was the first mistake, one of many, that night. Preparation was always the part one told myself I was good at. It gave me something to focus on that wasn't the moral weight of what I was about to do. Planning let me pretend this was a logistics problem, not a human one. I spent days watching patterns instead of people. Times, places, habits. When she left the disco, how crowded the streets were, which shops closed first, where the lights dimmed. I avoided thinking about her as someone's daughter and treated her like a variable in an equation. That mental trick mattered more than I liked to admit. I cleaned out my apartment of anything that could tie back to me. Burned old notes. Swapped phones. I didn't carry weapons or anything dramatic, nothing that would make this feel like a movie. The goal was subtlety, not force. I told myself that if no one noticed, then maybe it wouldn't feel real. There were small rituals I followed back then. Strong coffee. No sleep the night before. I'd rehearse conversations in my head, even though I hoped not to have any. Every "what if" played out silently while I stared at the ceiling. What if she screamed? What if someone intervened? What if I froze? The money was already promised, not delivered. That was intentional. They wanted leverage, and I accepted that without complaint. I remember looking at myself in the mirror before leaving and thinking how ordinary I looked. That scared me more than anything, how easy it was to blend in while carrying something this dark inside. The night itself started off painfully normal. Music thumped from the disco a block away, bass rattling windows like a second heartbeat. People laughed, smoked, argued about nothing. That's the part that still messes with me. The world doesn't pause just because you're about to do something irreversible. I arrived early and stayed distant, leaning against my car like I was just killing time. I kept my eyes unfocused, watching reflections in windows instead of faces. When she finally stepped outside, I knew it was her immediately, not because I recognized her, but because everything in me went still. Preparation gives you confidence, but instinct takes over in moments like that. She wasn't alone at first. A small group spilled out with her, all loud and careless in that drunk, end-of-night way. That wasn't ideal. I remember feeling a flicker of irritation, followed by fear that I shoved down hard. This was the first unexpected complication, and it reminded me that plans are fragile things. I waited. That was always my strength, patience. Eventually the group fractured, people peeling off toward buses, cars, different streets. When she started walking on her own, the city seemed to quiet around us, like someone had turned the volume knob down. I followed at a distance that felt safe but not suspicious. Every step felt amplified in my chest. This was the point of no return, though I didn't call it that back then. I called it execution of the plan. Like I was still just checking boxes on a list instead of crossing a line I'd never uncross. That's when I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear of getting caught, but from the sheer awareness that this was happening. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Now. I slowed my pace to match hers without meaning to. It's strange how your body takes over when your mind is screaming to stop. The street she chose wasn't empty, but it wasn't busy either, just enough foot traffic to feel normal, not enough to feel safe. I remember thinking that the city itself was complicit, offering shadows and indifference in equal measure. She kept checking her phone, probably texting someone she loved, or at least trusted. That detail dug into me in a way I didn't expect. It made her real again, and I had to force myself back into that colder headspace. Focus on timing. Focus on surroundings. Don't think about aftermath. The plan hinged on a brief interaction that wouldn't raise alarms. No sudden movements. No confrontation that could spiral. I told myself I was minimizing harm, which is a ridiculous thing to say given the outcome, but that's how I justified every step. Harm reduction, I called it. Clean work. When I finally spoke to her, my voice didn't sound like mine. It came out calm, almost friendly. I remember being shocked by that, by how easily I could sound normal. She hesitated, as anyone would, and for a split second I thought she might turn away and everything would unravel. My heart was pounding so hard I worried she could hear it. She looked around, scanning faces for reassurance that wasn't there. People passed us without really seeing us. That's another lie we tell ourselves, that someone will notice, that someone will intervene. Most people are locked in their own heads, their own small crises. When she finally nodded, more out of politeness than trust, something inside me clenched. This was the moment where walking away was still possible. I knew it. I felt it. And I ignored it anyway. The next few minutes are the ones I'm the most careful about revisiting. Not because they're dramatic, but because they're mundane. Evil rarely announces itself with fireworks. It just sort of slides into the room and sits down. We walked for a bit. Not side by side, not far apart. Just enough distance to look accidental. I remember the sound of our footsteps syncing up, then falling out of rhythm again. She made small talk, nothing memorable, just the kind of filler conversation people use to bridge awkwardness. Weather. Music. How late it was. I responded automatically, like my mouth was running on muscle memory. Something went off script then. A car slowed as it passed us, windows down, someone yelling something drunk and unintelligible. It startled both of us. My heart jumped into my throat. For a second, I was sure this was it, that attention would snap into focus, that the fragile bubble of anonymity would burst. But the car drove on. The moment dissolved. She laughed nervously. I laughed too, a little too late. That laugh still echoes in my head sometimes. It sounded real. That scared me more than if it had sounded fake. I adjusted. That's what I did best, adapt. The plan bent, but it didn't break. I told myself that flexibility was proof I was in control, not the opposite. In reality, every adjustment pushed me further from the version of myself I still pretended existed. There was a moment, brief, sharp, where she hesitated again. Asked a question that wasn't part of the script in my head. I answered without thinking, and she accepted it. That acceptance felt heavier than resistance ever could have. That's when I knew there was no clean exit anymore. Not for her. Not for me. This is the part where I need to slow myself down, even now. Not because of what happened in a physical sense, but because of what happened internally. There's a moment in every bad decision where it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like momentum. I crossed into that moment without noticing the exact step. The location we reached wasn't dramatic. No dark alley, no cinematic setup. Just a quieter stretch where the city thinned out and people stopped making eye contact. I remember thinking how ordinary it all looked, how it could have been any night, any street, any two strangers passing through. She realized something was wrong before I admitted it to myself. You can see it in a person, the way their shoulders tense, how their breathing changes. That awareness hit me like a punch. My instincts screamed to abort, to say something clumsy and walk away, to let embarrassment be the worst outcome. Instead, I stuck to the role I'd rehearsed. Calm. Controlled. Predictable. I kept my voice low, steady, the way you do when you don't want to draw attention. People like to imagine criminals as frantic or unhinged, But the truth is scarier than that. I felt focused. There was resistance, not violent, not dramatic, just human. Confusion. Fear. Questions I didn't answer. That was harder than I expected. Harder than if she'd screamed or fought. It forced me to confront the reality that this wasn't a problem to solve. It was a person realizing her life was about to change. I won't go into specifics. Not because I'm protecting myself, but because the details don't matter as much as the decision itself. Once I committed, everything after felt like following through on a contract I'd already signed. And when it was over, the silence was deafening. No music. No laughter. Just the city continuing on, indifferent, like it always does. I didn't feel what I expected to feel when it was over. There was no rush of triumph, no cinematic panic. Just a hollow calm that settled in my chest like fog. The kind that muffles everything. Sounds felt distant. My own breathing didn't feel like it belonged to me. I remember standing there longer than I should have, frozen by the weight of what had just happened. That's something no one tells you. After a line like that is crossed, your brain doesn't immediately know what to do next. The plan accounted for logistics, not for shock. Not for the strange grief that hit me out of nowhere. I forced myself into motion. Motion was safer than thinking. I retraced my steps, scanning for anything out of place, anyone who looked like they might have noticed something. No one did. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to stop their night for it. That realization stung more than I expected. Every shadow felt like an accusation. Every passing car made my muscles tense. I replayed fragments of the night on a loop, hunting for mistakes. Did I linger too long? Did I say something that would stick in someone's memory? Paranoia crept in fast, feeding on adrenaline and guilt. When I finally got back to my car, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat there for a long time before turning the key, staring at the dashboard like it might offer guidance. That was the first moment I understood that even if I walked away physically untouched, something inside me had cracked. And there was no going back to who I'd been before. Not really. The worst part came after the movement, after the adrenaline burned off. Waiting. Waiting is where your mind turns on you. I kept expecting sirens, a knock at the door, some sign that the universe was about to balance the books. None of that happened. The silence stretched on, and it felt punitive in its own way. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. Every sound in my apartment felt amplified, like the building itself was listening. I avoided mirrors. When I did catch my reflection, I barely recognized the person staring back. Same face. Different gravity. Like something had lodged itself behind my eyes. The news broke faster than I thought it would. Missing person. Concerned family. A photo that made my stomach drop even though I already knew it was coming. Seeing her framed in pixels, smiling, alive, was worse than anything I'd imagined. It stripped away the abstractions I'd clung to. This wasn't a job anymore. It was a void people were screaming into. I justified staying informed as risk management, but that was a lie. I was looking for punishment. For confirmation that this mattered. That she mattered. Each update twisted something tighter inside me, even as the world kept spinning like nothing had changed. I didn't contact anyone. Didn't celebrate. Didn't even think about the money yet. All I could do was wait and wonder whether the consequences would come from outside, or whether they'd already settled in, quietly, where no one else could see them. What I didn't expect was how many ripples one act could create. Not legally, at least not yet, but socially, psychologically. People I barely knew started talking about it. Coworkers. Neighbors. Strangers in line at coffee shops. Everyone had a theory, a suspicion, a monster in mind. Listening to them speculate felt like standing in a room where everyone was pointing at a shadow that I was casting. Someone I knew casually mentioned her father one afternoon. Not in a dramatic way, just as gossip. How powerful he was, who he knew, how. This kind of thing doesn't happen without consequences. That sentence lodged itself deep in my chest. It reframed the whole situation. I'd thought of the job as contained. It wasn't. It was embedded in a web I didn't fully understand. Then came the call. Not from law enforcement, not from the family, worse. One of the intermediaries. Calm voice. Polite. Thanked me. Told me to stay quiet, to stay boring, to let the dust settle. It wasn't a threat, exactly, but it wasn't reassurance either. It reminded me that I wasn't the only one carrying secrets. I started seeing danger everywhere after that. Not just being caught, but being erased. I'd been useful, but usefulness has an expiration date. That realization shifted the fear from abstract guilt to something sharp and personal. I tried to justify everything again. Told myself this was the cost of survival, of choices made long before that night. But the justifications were thinning out. They didn't cover as much ground as they used to. And for the first time, I wondered if the real confrontation wasn't coming from outside at all, but from inside, where I had nowhere to hide. By the second week, the fear stopped being sharp and started being constant. That's worse, in my opinion. Sharp fear makes you alert. Constant fear just grinds you down. I went through the motions of daily life like an actor who'd forgotten why he was on stage in the first place. I noticed small changes in myself. I jumped at sudden noises. I snapped at people for no reason. I stopped answering calls from friends because I couldn't stand the idea of pretending everything was normal. The lies took effort now. Before, they'd come easily. Effortlessly, even. That ease was gone. I tried to rationalize what I was feeling. Told myself it was just stress, just come down from adrenaline. That it would pass. It didn't. Instead, memories started surfacing at inconvenient times, waiting in line, brushing my teeth, staring at traffic lights. Not full scenes, just fragments. A look. A pause. A decision I couldn't unmake. The money finally came through, delivered exactly as promised. I didn't feel relief when I saw it. No satisfaction. Just a strange sense of distance, like it belonged to someone else. I remember thinking, this is what a life costs. Not in a moral way, more like an accounting error that no one bothered to correct. I kept the cash hidden untouched. It felt radioactive. Proof that everything I was trying to compartmentalize had actually happened. I told myself money was the point, but now that it was there, it didn't explain anything. It didn't fix the sleepless nights or the growing sense that the person I'd been relying on, myself, was no longer reliable. That's when I realized the armor I'd built over years of bad decisions was cracking. And once that starts, it's only a matter of time before something gets through. About a month in, I had my first real scare. Not a siren, not handcuffs. Something subtler, and in some ways worse. A knock at the door in the middle of the afternoon. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just deliberate. I remember standing there, staring at the door, every scenario crashing through my head at once. I ran through excuses, exit plans, lies stacked on top of lies. I could feel my pulse in my ears. This was it, I thought. This was where the story ended. It wasn't the police. It was someone asking questions. Casual ones? Too casual. About the neighborhood. About what I'd seen that night weeks ago. They didn't accuse me of anything. That was the point. Accusations can be denied. Open-ended questions just sit there, daring you to fill the silence. I kept my answers short. Boring. I leaned hard into being forgettable. I don't remember. I wasn't home. I didn't notice anything unusual. Every sentence felt like walking a tightrope, aware that one wrong word could tip everything over. They thanked me and left. I shut the door and slid down against it, breathing like I'd just run miles. That encounter changed something fundamental in me. Until then, I'd been living with the idea of consequences. Now I'd brushed up against their shape. Their proximity. I realized how thin the line really was. How much of my freedom rested on other people's apathy, on systems being overwhelmed, on attention drifting elsewhere. That wasn't control. That was luck. And luck I knew better than to trust. After that knock, I stopped thinking in terms of days and started thinking in terms of intervals. Time between looks over my shoulder. Time between nightmares. Time between moments where I forgot, briefly, and then remembered all over again. Life became a series of held breaths. I changed habits. Not in dramatic ways, no sudden disappearances or reinventions. Just subtle shifts. Different routes. Different routines. The kind of changes no one notices unless they're already looking. I told myself it was smart. Really, it was fear settling into muscle memory. What surprised me most was how ordinary guilt felt. Not explosive. Not poetic. Just persistent. It didn't stop me from eating or working or laughing at dumb jokes. It just sat there, like background radiation. Invisible, but always doing damage. I'd catch myself enjoying something and immediately feel a backlash of self-disgust, like pleasure itself was evidence against me. I tried to justify staying detached. Told myself that if I let the weight fully in, it would crush me, and crushed people make mistakes. That logic kept me functional, but it also kept me hollow. I was surviving, not living, and even that felt borrowed. Every so often, I'd imagine telling someone. Not confessing to authorities, just telling. Letting the words exist outside my head. But every version of that fantasy ended the same way, with silence, horror, distance. So I kept quiet and carried it alone, convincing myself that isolation was the price of staying free. That's when I realized this wasn't just about avoiding consequences anymore. This was the consequence. Time did what it always does. It put space between the act and the memory, without ever really erasing it. The case cooled. Headlines shrank. Conversations moved on to newer tragedies. From the outside, it probably looked like I'd gotten away with it. In a technical sense, I had. I leaned into distance as a survival tactic. Emotional distance. Social distance. I kept people at arm's length, not because I was afraid they'd find out, but because I was afraid they'd get close enough for me to feel like a fraud. Every relationship felt dishonest by default, built on an omission too big to ignore. I learned how to perform normalcy better than ever. Show up. Smile. Listen. Make future plans I didn't believe in. The irony is that the more convincingly I played the role of an ordinary guy, the more alien I felt inside it. Like I was wearing someone else's skin. There were moments, rare, unsettling moments, where I almost convinced myself the story was exaggerated. That memory has a way of softening at the edges if you don't touch it directly. But then something small would snap it back into focus. A song from that era, a passing comment, a face that reminded me just enough to make my stomach drop. I didn't stop being afraid of getting caught. That fear never fully goes away. But it changed shape. It became less about prison and more about exposure. About being seen for who I actually was beneath the disguise I'd spent years perfecting. That's when I understood something I wish I'd known earlier. Hiding isn't the same as escaping. Sometimes it just means the sentence gets stretched out longer, quieter, and far more personal. I don't tell this story because I think it makes me interesting, or because I want sympathy. I tell it because pretending it didn't shape me would be another lie stacked on top of the old ones. Looking back now, with years of distance, I can finally see how narrow my thinking was back then, how I reduced an entire human life into a problem to be solved. What haunts me most isn't one single moment, it's the accumulation. All the tiny decisions that felt insignificant on their own. The calls I didn't hang up. The questions I didn't ask. The moment I chose efficiency over humanity, and told myself that was maturity. That's how people like me are made, not in one dramatic leap, but in inches. I used to think the worst thing that could happen was being caught. Prison. Exposure. Public shame. Now I understand that the deeper cost was internal. The erosion of whatever moral compass I once had. The quiet knowledge that I am capable of things I used to believe were other people's sins. There's no redemption arc here. No sudden turn where everything balances out. Just clarity, arriving late and uninvited. If you're wondering whether I regret it, the answer is yes, but not in the way movies portray regret. It's not loud. It's not cleansing. It's a constant, low-grade ache that reminds me who I chose to be when it mattered most. And that's the truth I sit with now. Not because it frees me, but because denying it only tightens the grip. If there's anything I've learned from carrying this for so long, it's that the moment you start telling yourself, I don't have a choice, you've already given one up. That's the lie everything else grows from. I told myself I was trapped by circumstances, by money, by the people above me pulling strings. The truth is simpler and harder to accept. I chose convenience over conscience, and I've been living with that choice ever since. I'm not here to warn you about crime in the abstract. You already know it's wrong. What I want to say is this: don't underestimate how quietly it changes you. There's no clear before and after line, no dramatic collapse. You just wake up one day and realize you don't recognize the way you think anymore. That your inner voice has learned to sound calm while saying monstrous things. If you're standing near a line you know you shouldn't cross, whether it's illegal, unethical, or just deeply wrong, walk away while it still feels like an option. Embarrassment, loss, even hardship are temporary. Becoming someone you can't stand to be alone with is not. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. This is just one story among many I'll never tell out loud. Writing it here doesn't make me better, but it does make me honest, at least for once. Take that honesty, if nothing else, as proof that some decisions don't end when the night does. They just follow you, quietly, for the rest of your life.